Moving to item D, resolution 912071923, capital levy. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Last month, you had an opportunity to discuss what a capital levy was, what it could be used for, and gave some direction to the superintendent associated with what you would want to see in a draft resolution coming back to you. We worked with legal counsel and developed really several options of specific projects that could be included. They're included in a spreadsheet, both in the packet. I think you all have them. These options all total $12 million each. That represents a 2-year capital levy, $6 million each year. The rate is based on assumed property values over the next 2 years. And the rates would be $1.09 and $1.06 respectively in 2024 and 2025. That ensures that the overall tax rate for public would not go up when you combine the maintenance operations, the EP&O levy with the capital levy. No homeowners should see an increase in the overall average rate district-wide. That $12 million, I have provided 3 options. You are not required to select any one of those. The idea here was to give you a sense of the projects that we consider to be emergent, necessary moving forward. Those include funding the land purchase at McNeil Street, Cherrydale's HVAC system, school security and exterior lighting upgrades district-wide, the Steilacoom High School roof and building envelope, that is the exterior walls, ensuring that the building continues to remain dry and safe, so it needs to be repainted, sealed, caulked, roofing replaced, all of those, flashing, all of those things. It's incredibly expensive to do on a very large building like this. And then HVAC controls district-wide. Frankly, this doesn't cover all of the HVAC controls, but we can only do so many at a time anyway, so about $500,000 is the number that we could manage in a 2-year period. And then technology system improvements, that is really the upgrades to switches, routers, the underlying infrastructure of the district, and as well as upgrading to the normal hardware that has to be upgraded every 3 to 4 years, like Chromebooks. They are no longer supported after a certain amount of time. So this allows us to have a revenue source to replace that over the next 2 years. Those are the things that we considered emergent. They're included in all 3 of the options. Of course, the board would not have to include one of those items if they decide not to. The other ones are really mix and match items where some of them are related to future growth, some of them may be related to program changes, others would be necessary if we decided not to go out for a bond in the next 2 or 3 years. For instance, the HVAC at Chloe Clark probably works just fine for the next 3 years. Once we get out 3 years, we need to start putting, it will continue to work, just like the roof here will continue to work. But if we don't replace the roof, we're going to have to put a lot of money into funding normal repairs, because this roof will start leaking. The HVAC system at Chloe Clark will begin to go out on hot days and things like that. So that is why those are necessary if no bond issue is forthcoming. And the other couple items at the bottom were based on feedback that we received during the bond. A number of people indicated that they would like to see field turf on the baseball fields or additional field turf on other athletic facilities. So I included that just to give you a sense of what the dollar value would be on those types of projects if you decided to include that in a capital levy project. I'd encourage you to mix and match only to the extent that you stay within that $12 million figure. If you don't stay within the $12 million figure, then the overall dollar amount will be greater than that $1.09, $1.06, which may cause an increase to tax rates for taxpayers. Happy to answer any questions that you may
So do we ask for a motion and a second before we discuss options, or do we discuss options now?
You typically would, in a typical process, you would make a motion. In this case, because I know you are going to be potentially mixing and matching and determine exactly which, you should reach some sort of consensus about which projects and then move an amended resolution to include the projects that you have identified. So I'd recommend that you discuss what projects you might want to include and then move forward on the motion on the resolution.
Because I have a lot of marks on my paper. When I look at things, like half of the future growth to me is kind of like I don't know that it's crisis. The stuff that's emergent crisis, to me that's not an issue. I think some of the future growth stuff can be an issue, and I think that the ones that are necessary with no bond, if we did it this way, then it gives us cushion to really reevaluate, reconnect, and restructure what a bond would look like. Because most of all this stuff would have been in the bond, which means we really do need to re-engage with the community to restructure what the follow-up bond would be once we accomplish these things. If that makes sense. So let's just look at option 1 first.
Before we do that, can I ask a wild card question? Okay. So I'm kind of looking at Dr. Rodriguez back there, because I'm wondering about certain things that we might be able to get grants for, possibly. For example, is there any opportunity to get a grant for turf or grants for technology system improvements, things like that? And what would that look like, and how speedy could we get it? What's the feasibility for that? Maybe this is an unfair question.
In terms of DODEA grants, there are some limitations in terms of items above $5,000, equipment, construction items. So if we're like thinking about building a CTE wing, which I know we would all love to see,
Yeah.
we can't construct things with that grant money. So there are a lot of limitations with the federal grants in that capacity. We certainly could not use it for turf.
Yeah. There's no private grants out there, or
I can't say that I've looked for turf grants.
Or
If that is
tech
something you
grants.
wish me to do, I will
I'm not
certainly
directing
attempt
you
it.
to do anything. I don't think, but it was just a question that came up. Like, are there other funding sources that we might be able to pull from or think about as a possibility, and then offset some of these? But it sounds like maybe, definitely not.
It's a really great idea. But one thing about grants is, and Lori's great at finding grants, she jumps right in. Usually grants have a district component, so a match to put up the money, and it also involves a lot of staff time, which I'm sure Lori would do, but with our cuts in administrative support staff, it's going to be a little tricky next year to be searching and trying to find grants and then match money.
I've done a little searching for grants for turf. Typically,
Really?
there are a number, like NFL, in essentially the major league, the leagues
Yeah.
have foundations and supports that can provide turf fields. They typically provide them to schools and districts that have much higher free and reduced lunch populations than we have. So in most cases, we would not qualify because our free and reduced lunch population or poverty populations aren't above 50%. Technology, similar, there are opportunities. There were a lot of opportunities 10 years ago and 15 years ago. There are fewer opportunities, but there are still opportunities with the big technology players. But sometimes that requires you to change the operating systems or the technology that you utilize. For instance, I bet we could get a grant from Apple with some matching funds, but we would have to change the type of technology that we have. So there are trade-offs that we make with the technology. There's nothing that I've seen on the technology side that's readily available that it would address the immediate needs. And I know that both Mark and Paul Harvey looked at that over the last couple years related to Chromebook replacements.
Thank you.
I think sometimes too, I've heard that you can find grants or funding related to lighting upgrades because you're changing the lighting fixture, so you're reducing your, increasing your efficiencies, also lowering your gas costs and so forth like that. So it's helping the system. So but that would be a pursuit process.
Yeah, if I may, Shay Emery does an excellent job at pursuing all of those energy enhancement grants, and has done a great job for a number of years. So he pursues a number of those grants. We've been accepted to do many of those, and each one of these energy efficiency upgrades, we likely would approach Puget Sound Energy or one of the different utilities and apply for grants as part of that.
I'm going to suggest a methodology here as we go through here. Can we all just stipulate that everything that's listed as emergent is needed?
Right.
So we don't need to really, and maybe just go down from that, draw a line there and go down and look at each one of those items. For instance, site work and parking at Steilacoom High School, which is listed in option 3, $2.2 million. This assumes a new stadium. But if a new stadium isn't in the bond, then have we, is it something we should be really planning for?
Not in an urgent,
Not in an urgent.
in our urgent needs of the district category, no.
So-
It's
That
not.
might be the next criteria that we use, like is it contingent upon something else
Right.
happening?
And the same for the turf.
Well, let's go to item by item. So could we maybe just agree that that particular item is not something we'd want to include? So I'll just put a little X to the side here. Traffic revisions for Cherrydale, Chloe Clark, and Salters Point, $1 million listed in options 2 and 3. Granted, it's under future growth. I'm going to say the but. We know we have traffic problems at Chloe Clark. We know we have traffic problems at Cherrydale. We know we have traffic problems at Salters Point. And so we're going to have to address them sooner or later regardless. So in my opinion, I think that line item should probably be addressed with capital levy because we need to get that done regardless. So that one becomes a check mark. Set aside for modular classrooms. Those are wet modular classrooms, and at 500 grand for them, that's how many modulars would that be, Sean? 1, 2?
It's one double.
One double wide. That
How
could,
many students does that accommodate?
well, it's 2
And what's
classrooms, so it'd be like 50
classrooms?
students.
But it's a double wide, so you can't split that thing between schools.
So
Okay.
you could also do a 2 individual classrooms for about 500 grand. The site cost is the wild card. So you could split one classroom, but this essentially addresses an increase of 50 students where we think the growth will occur, and we think the growth will occur in Chloe Clark.
What is the timeline on that growth though? Because we're not projecting it in the next year, right? But what would you think in terms of?
Yeah, now, again, you're asking me to predict future growth of enrollment after I told you
I know.
I am uncomfortable projecting future growth of enrollment.
Yeah.
Right now, from a budget standpoint, we're projecting very conservatively and saying we're not growing. And at the same time, we have no capital resources. And if we grow, if for some reason the old Fork Lake property, Old Fort property.
Fort Lake.
Yeah, you all know the property that I'm referring to. If they begin doing multi-family construction there and we begin seeing elementary school students, we will not have capacity in Chloe Clark to address a growth issue, and there's no capital funds in our current capital budget to address that. So this would set aside $500,000 if that growth happened 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. If we start seeing that construction, we have to start working with the city on locating that, pre-purchasing that.
What's the lead time for a modular?
6 months on the minimum, 6 months to get it constructed, and 3 months to install. So 9 months to.
And we're talking about a modular and not a portable. So a modular more like what we have at Salters.
What is
The-
I was gonna say, so, if we ran a bond again for a new elementary school, the timing on that would be,
I think what you're asking, so I'm gonna give you an example. If the board decided to put a bond before voters in the 2025 election cycle, it would pass. We would sell bonds, begin design. The new elementary school wouldn't be ready any earlier than the 27-28 school year.
Is the capacity at the Chloe Clark, like land-wise, is it maxed out for Chloe Clark expansion to meet the needs of future growth?
You're reading my mind, because we've had this discussion before in past years, and just whether it's Cherrydale or Chloe Clark or even Salters, I mean, just finding space to put another modular classroom. I mean, they're really kind of built out until unless you want to go out onto the play field, and then they're not close to the building. So there's really, it's really a challenge to try and actually site modulars or portables at Cherrydale or Chloe or Salters. We've kind of used up the land at Salters. We picked that place in the front by the parking lot.
Do you want me to address this? Why don't you go first?
Sam, years ago, you'll probably remember that we were not looking at modular classrooms. We were looking at, portables, and we could site it a double wide width bathroom at Chloe. During my time here, we've never looked at the Cherrydale site for modular classrooms. But there is capacity at Chloe Clark. What we were running into were some issues with trees and the rules around the preservation of trees. So
Non-native areas.
possibly, I don't remember, but it wouldn't be an easy thing to do, but it could be done.
I'm very glad that you went first, Dr. Wade, because that was much more specific than the general answer I was going to give. I was just going to say, I've dealt with more constricted sites than the ones that we have here. Generally, if you are bursting at the seams in terms of student enrollment and you have no other options, the city really has they will work with you to address emergent, immediate needs to site portables. There always is some mitigation issues you have to go through, but these sites can accommodate additional classrooms. The things that you have to do to address that those things are sometimes challenging. So
that line item should stay in. Since we don't know when we're going to do a bond, and it would be at least, even if we passed one next year, it's still going to be 4 years before a new school's built. So.
And the school that has the greatest need would be
Chloe.
Chloe Clark right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
The next item is Anderson Island classroom, outdoor track and playground, and you plugged $1 million in there. To accommodate the reintegration of 4th and 5th graders, which I understand is like 6 kids for next year. Five kids for next year. So to spend $650,000 to $700,000 on the classroom and then outdoor track and playground, and this is property we don't own. I mean, Anderson Island Parks actually owns the property. We maintain it and we take care of it.
Is that classroom, the idea for Anderson Island, would that also be like a modular classroom?
It would. The difference in cost for Anderson Island is
Huge.
it's transportation and site work. Those two things are much more significant on Anderson Island.
Just as to reinforce what you said, when we passed the 2005 bond, we had every project come in on time and at or under budget except one. And that was the multipurpose building at Anderson Island, because Craig Mason, who was the principal and DLR associate, the architect, had failed to take into account the cost of ferrying all the equipment and supplies over the island, and how much longer and more expensive it is to get the construction people over there. And so if a regular building is constructed, let's say at $15 a square foot, it's closer to $25 a square foot to build a building, to put a building on Anderson Island, just because of the logistics of getting things there. And so, $500,000 for a modular classroom for Chloe Clark versus $650,000 to $700,000 to essentially do the same thing at Anderson Island. That doesn't seem like an economically wise decision at this time, or economically wise option. What do you guys think?
I'm so torn on this, because if we do that program change, I mean, it's, how does it, I guess I just have questions about how it's gonna work when, I know some of the parents are saying, we have K-8 with like one teacher, but that is just not feasible, the way that things
The
work.
parents are not teachers.
Right, so, but if we have K-5 there, it's still the same kind of situation,
Is it?
you can't have a kindergartner and a 5th grader in the same room.
Of course, how many of you actually went to elementary school in a multi-age classroom? Okay. Mine were 2 grades in one classroom, and the teacher split her time between, and that was back when you had 30 kids in the classroom, and all the desks were in straight rows and lines, and you got half the instruction. And so I just can't imagine putting 3 and 4 grades in one classroom and having one teacher and maybe a couple pairs, and the quality of the education just will not be there. It's not possible.
And the transition to middle school for those kids.
I mean, it's the socialization and the transition to middle school. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we did the 4th and 5th graders off island anyway, because Sarah Campbell identifying that the Anderson Island kids, when they transitioned to 6th grade, were having some real adjustment challenges.
And I think too, like we really are listening to kind of what the community wants and is asking for, and it sounds like, just from getting some updates and briefings, that it's back in 2015, 16, 17, that it was a bunch of parents that came forward and said, we want to be at Salters. And so I think that the district is looking at ways to solve some problems and issues, from transportation. Some of that is completely out of our control because the county runs our ferry system, and that's a completely different, that is something that's out of our control, and I know the district works and talks to the ferry administrator, but, I think there's a way moving forward to have something where there could be some program success for their kids. And I know, you've been listening, you have creative ideas in your team, and so, and then you look at too, like we have the future upcoming bond. You know, I will say just personally, I believe in neighborhood schools, especially for your elementary. And that's something that I think we all believe in. Like, we wanted to bring a bond that kept DuPont elementary kids in DuPont, kept Steilacoom elementary, and we want to do that for Anderson Island as well. The bond didn't pass. We tried to do it a second time. And I think in the future, when we do run a bond, that's going to be something that's on our priority list.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's completely true. And when we did make the grade configuration change at Anderson Island, it didn't happen instantaneously. It was years and years of feedback and to do it right. I mean, you can make a decision and maybe make it work, but it took years for us to figure out the right way to do well for those babies. And so if transportation is now a concern, we're looking into that and trying to find ways to fine tune it. But the bond would have created some consistency in program where Steilacoom K-5 were in one place, DuPont and Anderson Island. It made sense for that planning, and it would have given us a little bit of time to make sure we do it in an effective, thoughtful way.
I think part of it too is if we're talking 5th, 4th, and 5th graders, that doesn't mean they're going to stay on the island, because they have choice. They could choose to go to Salters. That just doesn't seem economically a wise line item at this time. Okay. Save that for a bond, so we can really do it right on a bond. Now we're down to some of the necessary, if we don't run a bond right away, HVAC for Chloe. Let's do them one at a time.
Question for you, Sean. You said it has a good 3 years probably on the HVAC for Chloe. Does the spending have to happen within the 2-year period that we are collecting the funds? Or are you able to spend it in the future, a year later? How does that work?
That's an excellent question, and I probably should have covered some of the cash flow challenges. We collect this as property tax payments, so this $6 million each year would be, and I'm going to really round the numbers, about half of the first year would happen in April and half would happen in October. So you think about, we get $3 million in April, $3 million in October, $3 million the following April, $3 million the following October. So depending on which projects you select, we are not able to immediately, for instance, pay off the McNeil Island immediately, because we don't actually collect $4 million until
October.
we get to October. So the timing of when the money comes in isn't it's not like a bond where you sell the bonds and you have the access to the money immediately. You have access to the money as the property tax payments are paid. So this work wouldn't all get done within 2 years. Some of it would be done in year 3 after the second year collection had been made. And as you know, if the second year collection is in October, that's not necessarily optimal construction season. So one of these would be likely if you decided, for instance, the traffic revisions. We could easily do traffic revision studies early on, but the traffic revision projects themselves would probably be done in the summer following the second year, because we wouldn't want to do traffic revisions while school was in session. And there may be higher priority items that would happen prior to that. For instance, Cherrydale's HVAC, which would take precedence before we make traffic revisions. Does that make sense to you? So some of these would be done not in the 24 calendar year or the 25 calendar year, but the 26 summer.
But for the purchase of, I mean, Neil, was that a 1 year or 2 year?
It's 5 years.
It's a 5, okay, so we're good.
We are.
Okay.
Okay, so what you're saying is when we get the money, we just have to make sure that we carefully account for how we spend it so that it can be mapped back to what our priorities were and why we asked the voters to support us with the capital levy.
Yes, and I think once you have identified the specific projects that you want included, that makes it easier for Shay and I to schedule out which projects would be first, which could be accomplished the soonest, and we would have that information well in advance of needing to inform voters when they would likely see these projects done. I just couldn't do that in advance without knowing what the specific list is.
So I think, if I understand what you're saying, for instance, the HVAC at Chloe Clark is not as close to the end of its life cycle as the HVAC at Cherrydale. And that's a good thing, because while we'd say, well, we need to do that in the list of priorities, it might be one of the latter things done. And by then, it would be at the end of its life cycle. So that would actually be good building preservation plan. Okay, so that makes it. And it's kind of like a brand oil filter commercial, you know, pay me now or pay me later. So it's going to need to be done sooner or later.
And I was looking at facilities planning, and one of the things that should be considered is our facilities will meet and exceed all health, safety, and welfare regulations. And I know that's something that when our students are in the classrooms, and that we should have great filtration, you know, lighting, heating, cooling, and all that should be completely available to them so that they can learn. So it is definitely one of probably the important need.
So HVAC for Chloe should stay in the mix. Since it's a longer lead item, would probably happen in year 2 or 3.
I think that takes us to 12, doesn't it? About 9.
Yeah, I don't think so.
9 or 10,000.
Are you guys counting?
Because we have 1.5 with the traffic provisions in the modular classroom,
We're
right?
close.
If you were to look at that option 3, so far what I've heard is you've selected option 3
Yeah.
without the site work for Steilacoom High School.
Right.
So
Okay.
far.
So that means you have,
Actually, we've essentially selected option 2 so far.
yes.
Yeah.
So,
950,000.
so you should have exactly 950. That's right.
So
So
that would give us, okay, so that's option 2.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry. Thanks.
no, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of the things, if I may, just jump down to the last 2 items, turf the SHS football field, baseball, and fast pitch, and turf the middle school fields. Those are, to me, doing all those are definitely not a crisis priority. I mean, they just aren't. I mean, back in 2009-ish or 2010-ish or so, when we had known drainage problems at the Pioneer at the football field, we spent another $60,000 to have, Green something was the name, and it's the company that puts in custom drainage that does all the PGA golf courses and stuff like that, and lots of parks. And the problem we have with the fields at Pioneer is they're overused. So they actually work quite well. So I'm not smiling on turfing middle school fields and adding turf to baseball fields and stuff, and fast pitch fields for the high school. But that, to me, is not, that's nice to have, not a need to have. Does that make sense to everybody? But the other one is the turf in the high school football field. That's moving on to 10 years old. Yes, it is. So it's nearing the end of its. One of the unfortunate things, and you guys weren't on the board then, but I was. But when the community came to us as a board and said, we want to turf the football field, either do it as part of the bond or we'll get volunteers to come out and do it. And Rusty, the construction managers go, oh my God, you know, they just don't understand what it takes to put in a turf field. You're not gonna get volunteers to do all the excavation and grading and stuff like that. We were really, the board was sold it as, you put it in, it's one and done, you don't have to worry about it, because nobody did the additional research to look at what is the life cycle of a turf field. And after it had been in for a while, we started seeing how it needed to be groomed, and had more infill had to be put in and so forth. We realized we need to start setting aside money, because this field's gonna have to be replaced. And as we did the research, we realized that there's about a 10 to 12-year life for a turf field before it just needs to be replaced. And so we're nearing that point. That's what happens, everything gets compacted, and you're actually gonna cause more injuries to the athletes that are playing on it as the field gets old, because then it becomes like falling on concrete as opposed to tires. That's a long way of saying I think that the high school football field would also probably be a 2-year out, because it's a long lead item to do that, and it would take an entire summer to do it. So that would probably be a summer of 26 project.
Yeah. I have not, as I said, without knowing the exact list, I didn't go through and determine which summer, or I can bring all of that information back to you, but it certainly wouldn't be right away.
But it would be I think it would be a summer of 25 or summer of 26 project, and then it would be at the end of its life cycle.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Were you able to hear anything from Director Kinsley at all, just feedback on capital bond topic? I don't know, okay. And then Director Hogan, it's great to hear your voice back in meeting today, so.
Well, we have one thing left, and it's actually the least expensive thing in there, and that's the district, the lighting upgrades and stuff like that, and that's almost like a pocket change. Save money in the long run, right?
It will. It's a small dollar amount, but a high impact item for
So
classrooms.
it's a high return on investment.
Slight reduction in the cost,
Victor, you've been listening to all this. Do you have any comments you'd like to add to it?
I agree with all the comments. That I guess my only concern is I don't know the folks that Lance Mountains, like they've been, I guess, not heard or left out. But I agree with everyone's comments on the funding and the priorities. I don't have any disagreements, but I just the folks in Anderson Island feel that we're not listening to them or not taking into consideration their concerns for expansion. But I agree with all the comments that everyone's made. We want the priorities for the budget.
Thank you. I think we need to really, to me, emphasize that if we're going to do the Anderson, we need to do it right. Provide the best quality that we can for them. Without a bond, we really can't do that. So with the list that you've given us, Sean, it looks like, for the most part, option 2 represents the best value for the things that we need. LJ and Jim, what do you think? All right, so a motion would be to adopt the capital levy with items in option 2 as the projects. Is that right, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, how I'm going to interpret that is approval of resolution 9/12/07/1923 amended with section 2B amended to reflect the specific projects identified in object 2. That level of specificity, if you say that's what you meant, we can make sure we have the resolution reflect, the final resolution reflect that interest.
All right, so is there a motion to approve resolution 9/12/07/1923 capital levy and amend section 2B to reflect the projects identified in option 2 of the 3 options provided to us. Have I captured that correctly? Okay. Is there a motion for that?
I make a motion to approve, to move resolution 91207-1923 capital projects levy, using the section 2, option 2, with projects in the package to, do you need me to read it to, okay.
Is there a second?
It's like,
Okay.
Can I make a really quick comment?
Yes, well, we're at that point, so motion's been made and seconded, so now, any comments?
One
What's
of-
your questions?
Well, one of the things I think that's really important is that we do maintain a consistent tax rate for our citizens, and this definitely accomplishes that, but it meets and addresses urgent, important needs for our students and our staff, and so that's why I will be supporting it.
Victor, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just a quick thing. Even though we don't have the funding to support any expansion at Ennis Mountain at this point, I agree with the parents and their observation and needs for expansion, but at this time we got other priorities we got to focus on, as we all agree as board members, and so that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, sir. Motion's been made and seconded to approve resolution 91207-1923 capital levy as amended, section 2B amended to reflect the projects identified in option 2. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The resolution is adopted.